Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is February 19th, 2026.
And you can really feel the tension in the air. I mean, it's undeniable. The atmosphere is just, it's heavy. We're all watching the news feeds. We're looking at these live maps of the Strait of Hormuz, and you see this massive deployment of naval assets.
It's everywhere.
It really feels like we are sleepwalking, just sleepwalking into something completely irreversible.
We are standing at the precipice of a global conflict in the Middle East. That is the headline. I mean, it's screaming from every banner on the internet right now. You see the phrases game changer, pivotal moment. But if you've been listening to our deep dives for any length of time, you know that the headline is, well, it's rarely the whole story.
It's near the whole story.
The real story here isn't just about the ships and the missiles. It's about the machinery behind the curtain. It's about the invisible architecture that actually guides these decisions.
Exactly. You absolutely cannot understand the war drums beating in February 2026 without understanding the intelligence networks that have been manipulating the narrative for decades. These things are not separate silos. They're deeply connected.
This is what you're saying.
I'm saying the very same networks that are pushing for this escalation with Iran are the same networks that operated the blackmail ring we all know as the Epstein affair.
You know, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. It really does. Until you actually lay the documents out on the table.
Right.
And that is exactly what we're planning to do today. We're looking at the unredacted files. We're looking at the new reports, all of the connecting threads. And we're going to start with a story that, on the surface, might seem completely unrelated, almost like pop culture fluff.
Yeah, you wouldn't think to connect it.
Not at all. But it's actually the skeleton key to understanding how the system destroys threats. Today, we are talking about the vindication of a pop icon, Michael Jackson, and exposing the hidden truth that's been buried in the latest files about that infamous Zorro Ranch.
It's a dark journey today, it really is, but it's a necessary one. Because if you can understand what they did to Michael Jackson, I mean, how they dismantled a human being piece by piece, and you understand what they were hiding at Zorro Ranch, then you begin to understand how power actually works in this country.
So let's unpack this. For decades, the name Michael Jackson was synonymous with, well, we all know the narrative. The media painted him as a monster.
Relentlessly.
But there is a massive shift happening right now, and it's being fueled by some deep analysis from researchers like Ian Carroll. The whole narrative is flipping on its head.
It is flipping, and it's important to say it's not flipping because of nostalgia or, some kind of cultural revisionism. It's flipping based on hard data, a forensic re-examination of the timeline. And the prevailing theory now, which is backed by a lot of this new evidence, is what we're calling projection.
Projection. Okay, break that down for us in this specific context.
It's a psychological strategy, but it's also a tactical one. The industry, and when I say the industry, I mean the real power brokers in media and entertainment, they projected the crimes of the actual predators onto Jackson to discredit him.
So they took what they were doing?
Precisely. They took what people like Jeffrey Epstein, like Harvey Weinstein, and their entire circles were actually guilty of, and they painted Jackson with that same brush.
Which is, it's a terrifyingly effective strategy, isn't it?
Well, it's brilliant. In a dark way.
If you accuse your enemy of your own crimes, you muddy the waters so much that the truth just gets completely lost. You basically inoculate yourself against accusation because the public thinks, oh, right, they already caught the bad guy. It was that weird singer.
And the case is closed in the public's mind.
Exactly. But I want to look at the evidence that portrays Jackson not as a predator, but as a protector. I was reading through the accounts that have resurfaced, and I was looking specifically at the testimony that involved Macaulay Culkin.
The Culkin testimony is absolutely crucial, and it's been so cherry-picked by the media for years. They always tried to twist Culkin's relationship with Jackson into something sinister.
I remember that.
Of course. But if you actually look at the transcripts, if you listen to what Culkin really said, on the record, under oath, he stated explicitly that Jackson saved him.
Saved him. That is such a specific choice of words. It's not, he was nice to me or he's a friend. It's saved him. Saved him from what?
From the industry wolves. That's the only conclusion. More specifically, there are accounts, credible accounts, suggesting Jackson physically intervened to stop Macaulay Culkin from getting on a plane to Epstein's island.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. Saved him from getting on a plane. That implies a tremendous amount of knowledge on Jackson's part. He didn't just think it was a bad idea.
No.
He had to know what that plane represented. He had to know where it was going. He had to know who was on it and what they were doing.
Precisely. You do not stop a child from boarding a private jet, an exciting trip, unless you know with certainty that that jet is a one-way ticket to an absolute nightmare. Michael Jackson operated at the highest levels of celebrity. He saw the inner workings. He knew who the monsters were.
And then you have the case of Aaron Carter.
Yes.
Before he passed, I went back and reviewed his statements about the FBI. And they are genuinely chilling.
They really are.
I have the file on Carter right here in front of me. And he was incredibly vocal about this towards the end of his life. He described FBI agents working with his own mother, trying to coerce him, to pressure him into making false statements against Jackson.
Just think about the power dynamic in that room for a moment. You've got a young pop star. He's impressionable, likely dealing with his own substance abuse issues at the time.
Right. Very vulnerable.
Incredibly vulnerable. And you have federal agents, the badge, the gun, the full authority of the U.S. government pressuring him to lie. And what did he do?
He refused. Flat out refused. He told them, and this is a quote, "Are you crazy?" He knew Jackson was innocent. But that pressure from the state, the sheer force they were applying to fabricate a crime, it was immense.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to the big question. Why? I keep coming back to this. Why destroy a pop star? Why mobilize the Federal Bureau of Investigation against a singer? It seems like such a monumental waste of resources. Unless he wasn't just a singer to them.
Because he wasn't. And this is where we have to pivot from the social narrative to the financial and structural motive. This was not a personal vendetta. It was business.
High-stakes business.
Billion-dollar high-stakes business. Michael Jackson was becoming too powerful, way too powerful. He didn't just sing and dance on the stage. He owned the assets. He owned the infrastructure.
We're talking about the Sony ATV catalog.
We are, but we need to really grasp the scale of this. He owned 50% of the Sony ATV music publishing catalog. That isn't just a list of songs on a piece of paper.
Right.
That is the publishing rights to the Beatles, to Elvis Presley, to a massive, massive chunk of the entire history of Western popular music.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a minute here. What does owning the publishing actually mean in terms of raw power? Is it just, getting royalty checks in the mail?
Oh, it's so much more than that. It's leverage. Tremendous, almost absolute leverage. If Sony wanted to license a Beatles song for a major commercial, say for the Super Bowl or for a blockbuster movie or a new streaming format, and Michael Jackson said no, the deal died right then and there.
He had veto power.
Total veto power. He was, in effect, the boss of his own bosses at the label. He was physically blocking the flow of capital for one of the biggest media conglomerates on planet Earth. That's not a celebrity feud. That's a corporate hostage situation.
And he wasn't quiet about it either. I remember those speeches he gave. I'm thinking specifically of the one in Harlem where he started calling them out. He used the word cabal.
He was incredibly specific, which was probably his biggest mistake in their eyes. He didn't just vaguely say the man or the industry. He named names. He referenced executives like John Branca. He referenced the top leadership at Sony.
And what was he accusing them of?
Stealing from artists, manipulating the books, of being racist. He called it a conspiracy, point blank. Now, when a man with a microphone that big, literally the most famous person on the planet, starts telling the world that the industry is a criminal enterprise, well, that man becomes a very big target.
And the weapon they chose to use was his reputation. But here's the hard data. The piece that really, for me, just blows the Jackson as villain narrative completely out of the water. I've been digging through the FBI files, the ones released under the Freedom of Information Act.
This is the smoking gun of his innocence, in my opinion. It has to be.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation investigated Michael Jackson for 10 years.
A decade.
A full decade. And they didn't just casually ask around. We are talking about active surveillance. We're talking about confiscating his hard drives. They conducted these exhaustive searches of the Neverland Ranch. I mean, tearing the place apart from top to bottom. They had the full weight of the federal government looking for anything.
And what did they find?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Zero. No credible evidence of wrongdoing. Nothing illegal on any of his computers. Nothing found in the home.
Now just pause and really think about that for a second. We know now, thanks to the Epstein files, how ridiculously easy it is to find dirt on actual predators.
They leave trails.
They leave massive trails. They have networks. They have specific paraphernalia. They have flight logs. Jackson was the most scrutinized human being on Earth, and the FBI, an organization that, let's be honest, can usually find a parking ticket from 1982 if they want to jam you up, came up completely empty.
Now compare that to Epstein.
It's the perfect inverse. It is the complete and total opposite. While Michael Jackson was being hunted with zero evidence, Jeffrey Epstein was operating a massive international sex trafficking ring with, apparently, total impunity.
The police knew.
The FBI knew. We know for a fact they knew. The local police in Palm Beach absolutely knew. They looked the other way for Epstein while they were actively trying to manufacture crimes to pin on Jackson.
So the theory then is that Jackson wasn't a co-conspirator in this dark underworld. He was actually a target of it.
Exactly. He was a fish they desperately wanted to catch. Just imagine for a moment if they could have compromised Michael Jackson. Imagine if they had him on tape doing something horrific.
The blackmail potential would be off the charts.
It would be limitless.
Yeah.
They could blackmail him, and if they could blackmail him, they could control that catalog. They could force him to sign over the rights. They could control his global influence. But they couldn't catch him doing anything real because he wasn't doing anything. So they had to resort to plan B, destroy him in the media to strip away his power that way. If you can't blackmail them, you destroy their credibility. You bankrupt them with legal fees. You make them a pariah.
It makes a terrifying kind of sense.
Right.
And that brings us to the actual mechanism of that blackmail. Because for such a long time, the Epstein story was framed as just perversion. A rich guy with a sick fetish.
That was the cover story.
But the deeper we dive into these newly unredacted files, the more it looks like something much colder, much more calculated.
We have to move the conversation away from perversion and towards intelligence gathering. That is the only framework that explains all the anomalies, all the strange connections. This wasn't just a sex ring. It was a state-sponsored blackmail operation designed to control key figures in business, politics, and science.
Okay, let's talk about the skiff. This is one of those details that it stops you in your tracks when you read it. I was looking at the logs and the text messages that involve Steve Bannon and Epstein.
Yeah.
And these are from 2018.
Right. And the date, 2018, is so important for context. This is a full decade after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes in Florida. He is a registered sex offender. He is theoretically a total pariah.
They'd be.
And yet, what does he do? He texts Steve Bannon, a major political figure, and says, quote, "Going into a skiff talk tomorrow."
For our listeners who might not be in the defense or intelligence sector, let's just explain what a SCIS.
SCIF. It stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. And look, this isn't just a locked room with a good deadbolt. A SCIF is a secure facility, usually located inside a government building or a military base or a high-level defense contractor's office.
It's designed to be electronically silent.
Completely impervious to electronic surveillance. The walls are lined with copper to block signals. You have to leave your phone and any electronics outside. You need a specific high-level security clearance just to walk near the door.
So the million-dollar question. Why is a registered sex offender going into a SCIF?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. And he wasn't going in alone. The text strongly suggests he was meeting with Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, inside that very facility. You do not put a known pedophile in SCIF unless he is a valuable intelligence asset.
It implies official sanction.
It's the only logical conclusion. It implies an official government sanctioning of his presence. He wasn't sneaking in, he was invited.
And this connects directly to the analysis from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, doesn't it?
It does, perfectly.
Right.
Colonel Wilkerson, who was Colin Powell's chief of staff, a man who has seen the deep state from the absolute inside, has been incredibly blunt about this. He claims that Mossad and CIA operations have become so intertwined in certain areas that they are functionally the same entity.
A joint venture.
He suggests the Epstein ring was likely an intelligence asset for both Israel and the U.S., a joint venture in human compromise. The perfect deniable operation.
And they had the infrastructure to prove it. We found those emails, the ones about the Kleenex boxes. This part feels like something out of a bad spy movie, but it's right there in the court documents.
It sounds absurd, but the banality of it is what makes it feel so real. Epstein sends an email to his pilot, who is basically his chief logistics officer, and he instructs him to buy motion sensor cameras from a spy store down in Fort Lauderdale.
And I have the pilot's reply right here. He confirms he bought them and says, quote, installing them into Kleenex boxes now.
Kleenex boxes. Just think about the placement of that. Where do you put a Kleenex box in a guest room?
On a nightstand, beside the bed.
In the bathroom.
Exactly. So you have these powerful men, politicians, scientists, members of royal families coming into these lavish rooms thinking they're in a private space, and there is a high-definition, motion-activated camera rolling inside a tissue box right next to the bed.
It proves intent. This wasn't random. It absolutely proves intent. You don't set up motion sensor hidden cameras for your own personal enjoyment alone. You do it to create a library of leverage. That is systematic surveillance. That is a definition of a blackmail operation.
And it wasn't just Kleenex boxes, was it? We have the investigation from breaking points regarding Epstein's apartment on East 66th Street in Manhattan. This was the place where Ehud Barak and other Israeli figures would often stay.
This is a bombshell detail that the mainstream media just completely glossed over, almost ignored. The documents show that the Israeli government, and I'm talking specifically the consulate or the mission, paid for and installed the security systems at this private residence.
Wait, let me just get this perfectly straight. A private apartment, technically owned by Epstein's brother, but completely controlled by Jeffrey, has its entire security infrastructure paid for and installed by the State of Israel.
Yes, that's what the records show. And the implication is unavoidable. It implies that the property was, for all intents and purposes, an operational safe house. If the Israeli government is paying for the cameras, the alarms, the access control systems, they're securing their asset. It cements the link between Epstein and Israeli state intelligence. He wasn't just a friend of these politicians. He was housing them in a facility that was actively secured by a foreign government on U.S. soil.
It's absolutely staggering. And while the media always focuses on the island, Little St. James, there's another location that might be even darker.
The Zorro Ranch.
A Zorro Ranch in New Mexico.
The Zorro Ranch is the black hole at the center of this entire investigation. The island was the playground, the transactional space.
Yep.
The ranch feels like it was the laboratory.
We have to discuss this one unredacted email. It's from someone who identifies as former staff at the Zorro. It was sent as an extortion attempt, demanding Bitcoin. But the details.
Yeah.
They are just horrific. I want to read part of this, but I do have to warn listeners it is extremely graphic.
It's difficult to hear, but it's necessary. Go ahead.
The sender alleges that 2 foreign girls were buried in the hills just outside the main ranch house. The cause of death described is strangulation during what they call rough fetish sex. And the sender didn't just make the claim. They included video links as proof.
They said, here's the proof. And look at the demand, the amount of money they were asking for. They demanded 1 Bitcoin. At the time that email was sent, Bitcoin was trading at around $9,000.
Which is a remarkably low sum of money for information that explosive.
It's nothing, which suggests, to me, desperation. Or maybe it wasn't really about the money at all. Maybe it was a kind of dead man switch type of message. A warning, I know where the bodies are buried and I have proof.
Exactly. But the allegation of murder, of bodies physically buried on the property, that changes the entire calculus of this case. This isn't just trafficking anymore. This is capital murder. And it aligns with some of the other dark rumors that have been swirling around that ranch for years.
You're talking about the baby farm allegations.
Yeah. We have testimony from a survivor, Rina O.
Rina O's testimony is it's chilling, but it's consistent with other reports we've heard about Epstein's fascination with eugenics and transhumanism. He didn't just want to abuse these women. He had this bizarre messianic complex.
He talked about a cloning lab.
A cloning lab.
Yeah.
He explicitly told victims that he wanted to impregnate his favorites at the New Mexico property to create some kind of superior lineage, his own master race.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction horror novel.
It does. But we have to remember, this was a man who surrounded himself with the world's top scientists. He was funding Harvard researchers. He was obsessed with DNA and genetic engineering. He clearly viewed these women not just as objects for his pleasure, but as breeding stock. It's a level of delusion and grandiosity that fits perfectly with the profile of someone who believes they are completely above all human law.
You would think then, with credible allegations of bodies buried in the hills and a supposed baby farm, that the FBI would have torn that place apart. I'm talking ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, excavators, the works.
You would absolutely think that. It would be standard procedure in a murder investigation. But that never happened. To our knowledge, the property was never subjected to that kind of intensive forensic search by federal authorities. They searched the main house, sure, but the hills, the surrounding grounds, no.
And the cover-up seems to be continuing even after his death with how the property was disposed of.
The sale of the ranch in 2023. This is incredibly suspicious.
All right.
It is. The ranch was sold to a company called Rancho San Rafael. Now, if you dig into the corporate filings for that company, that LLC was created just 1 month before the purchase. It has all the classic hallmarks of a shell company designed for one specific anonymous transaction.
And the money trail eventually leads to a man named Donald Huffings.
Donald Huffins. The Trump-endorsed candidate for governor, a former Texas state senator, a man who runs on a platform of Christian conservative values.
The optics are just terrible. Why would a prominent Christian conservative want to buy a notorious sex trafficking site? And then, according to all the local reports, hide the purchase behind a freshly minted shell company.
It feels like a cleanup operation. That's the only thing that makes sense. You buy the site to control the site. If you own the land, you control who gets to dig in the hills. If that land had been sold to a normal developer or some transparent entity, they might have done an environmental survey. They might have started digging foundations. They might have found things. By keeping it in a closed, private loop, you ensure the secrets stay buried. Literally.
And this obstruction isn't just happening on a ranch in New Mexico. It's happening in the halls of Washington. We have Representative Nancy Mace coming out and practically screaming from the rooftops that the Department of Justice is blocking Congress.
She was furious, and she had every right to be. She stated publicly that the DOJ is redacting the names of co-conspirators, not just the names of victims, so they are actively protecting the perpetrators.
And she made an even more serious allegation.
She did. She claimed that the DOJ is spying on members of Congress who are investigating these files.
That's a fundamental violation of the separation of powers. But it shows you how high the stakes are for the people involved. Mace also noted the issue of the missing tapes. Based on the sheer number of cameras we know about, like the ones in the Kleenex boxes, there should be millions of files.
Millions of hours of footage. If every single room was wired, if every encounter was recorded for leverage, the archive should be absolutely massive. The DOJ has only acknowledged a tiny fraction of that. Where's the rest of it?
It's leverage. It's still out there. If you have the tapes, you own the people on the tapes.
And that leads us directly to the broader structure of power, because this isn't just about one bad ranch or one bad island. It's about a system of control. And this brings us to a concept outlined in the material by Professor David Miller. He calls it Pax Judaica.
Pax Judaica. It sounds almost Roman, like Pax Romana, the Roman peace. What does he mean by that term?
We need to be very careful and precise here. Professor Miller is describing what he sees as a geopolitical shift. He argues that Zionist interests, which he is careful to distinguish from purely American national interests, have effectively captured the key pillars of global power. He identifies 3 specific pillars: finance, technology, and the security state.
So the argument is?
The argument is that we are no longer living under a purely American empire, but an empire where these specific foreign interests sit atop the American architecture and direct its power.
Okay, let's break down those pillars one by one. Let's start with finance.
Miller points to what he describes as a disproportionate representation in the billionaire class. He mentions figures like Larry Ellison and others who use their vast wealth not just for business, but to buy media outlets, to fund political think tanks, to control the narrative. It's the same principle as the music catalog. If you own the platform, you control the version of truth the public receives.
And the second pillar, technology. This connects right back to what we were just saying about the SCIF and the constant surveillance.
This is the Unit 8200 connection. Unit 8200 is Israel's elite signals intelligence agency, their equivalent of the NSA or GCHQ. Miller and other analysts in this space point out that veterans of this unit, almost without exception, go on to found major cybersecurity and tech companies around the world.
And these are the same companies that then sell their software and hardware to the FBI, to the CIA, to European governments.
Exactly. And the central concern, the deep dive concern here, is the backdoor mechanism. If the software that's running your nation's critical infrastructure or your own intelligence agency's analysis was built by former Israeli intelligence officers, does it contain a backdoor? Are they spying on the spies? Miller's analysis argues yes. It creates a digital choke point where they can access sensitive data from virtually anywhere.
And then there's the third pillar, the security state, the neocons.
This is the ideological group that infiltrated the Pentagon and the State Department, particularly after 9/11. Their stated foreign policy goals align almost perfectly with ensuring Israeli regional hegemony, often at the direct expense of American strategic interests and American lives.
They were the ones who pushed for the war in Iraq.
For the war in Iraq, for the destabilization of Syria, and now for the looming conflict with Iran.
It's a captured system, and it explains why certain people never seem to get called to testify. The journalist Tara Palmieri put together what she calls a subpoena list of people who should be answering questions under oath, but mysteriously aren't.
And that list is just shocking when you see all the names written down in one place. Bill Burns, the current director of the CIA. Catherine Wimler, who is the top lawyer at Goldman Sachs and was a former White House counsel. Jess Staley, the banker. Noam Chomsky, Reid Hoffman, the tech billionaire.
These are titans of industry, academia, and government. Their names are in the flight logs. They had meetings. They had financial transactions with Epstein long after his initial conviction. Yet the media spotlight remains fixed on safe targets or on figures who are already dead, like Michael Jackson.
It's a protection racket. The structure protects its own, and it sacrifices anyone who threatens it. And that brings us to the terrifying reality of today, February 19th, 2026.
The drums of war.
The drums of war are beating very, very loudly.
We have to shift to the immediate context now. Just check the date. It is February 19th, 2026. If you filled up your car with gas this morning, you saw the prices jump again. The United States has moved 1/3 of its entire naval assets to the Middle East. And we're seeing confirmed reports that Iran has now fired missiles near U.S. ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
This is the culmination. This is the end result of everything we've been discussing. This is that Pax Judaica foreign policy in action. We're looking at a war that is being fought for Israeli interests, not for American interests. The escalation is textbook.
But the reporting suggests the White House is split on this. This is the fascinating political drama playing out behind the scenes right now. We're hearing very strong reports that Vice President J.D. Vance is vehemently opposed to this war.
Vance represents that old America First instinct, the one that is deeply skeptical of foreign entanglements that don't directly serve the U.S. He's looking at the map and asking the simple question, why are we doing this?
But look who is on the other side, pushing the other way.
Oh, it's the war lobby. It's all usual suspects. You have Netanyahu making direct public appeals to the U.S. president. You have Senator Lindsey Graham, who was quoted just last month saying, the wars of the future are planned here in Israel.
That quote is it's chilling.
Yeah.
Planned here in Israel. It implies the United States is just the muscle, just the hired gun for a strategy that's decided elsewhere.
And the military reality on the ground is a complete nightmare. We need to be listening to people like Scott Ritter and Colonel Wilkerson. They are screaming from the rooftops, warning that the U.S. Navy is sailing into a trap.
The Strait of Hormuz is incredibly narrow. It's a natural bottleneck.
It's a kill box, that's what it is. Iran's hypersonic missiles are designed for exactly this scenario. They fly too fast, too erratically for our standard Aegis defense systems to intercept them effectively.
Right.
If the U.S. moves aircraft carriers into that narrow channel of water, they are sitting ducks for a saturation attack.
Ritter has been very clear. He said we could lose a carrier.
Think about that, losing an aircraft carrier. Thousands of American sailors. A $10 billion symbol of American power sunk in a matter of minutes. The psychological shock would be immense.
And the economic impact.
Right.
If Iran successfully closes the strait.
Well, 20% of the world's oil supply passes through there every single day. If that choke point closes, gas goes to $10 a gallon overnight. The Western economy crashes. Inflation spirals completely out of control. It would be an economic catastrophe for the United States and for the world.
So why do it? I come back to that. Why risk economic collapse and a humiliating military defeat? It seems strategically suicidal.
Because Israel cannot fight a long, protracted war against Iran alone. They're too small, their resources are too limited. They need the United States to go in and degrade Iran's military capabilities for them. And this brings us right back to the files. The blackmail. If you have powerful politicians and generals and media moguls on tape, on videos from Kleenex boxes, in recordings from the Zorro Ranch, you have the leverage to force them to agree to a suicide mission. The Epstein files are not ancient history. They are the active leverage being used right now to drag the world into a war.
So what does this all mean for us? For the listener who's trying to make sense of this?
It means we have to stop looking at these stories as separate, disconnected events. They're all one story. The vindication of Michael Jackson shows us how the system destroys the innocent to protect the guilty. The Epstein files show us the mechanism of control, blackmail, and surveillance. The structure of Pax Judaica shows us who is holding the leash. And this insane rush to war with Iran, that is the result.
It's a lot to process, but I think the one thing you need to remember is this. The files aren't just about the past. They are the leverage being used right now to drag the world into a war that serves a foreign empire, not you.
And just understanding that, internalizing that, is the first step to breaking the conditioning. You have to question the narrative, watch who they target, watch who they protect, and always, always ask yourself, who benefits from the war?
We're going to leave it there for today. This is a story that is obviously still developing, and we will be watching every single move. If you found this analysis valuable, if you want the truth that the mainstream won't touch, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.